Today, I am super privileged and honored with the guest that we have on today. It is now a mentor, Robert Blackwell Jr., who is not only a Chicago-based American businessman and extremely successful entrepreneur who runs multiple companies like Killerspin, but also a personal friend of Barack Obama. Who is Robert Blackwell Jr.?
Born with two great parents that had no money. My mother was 20 and my father was 23 when I was born. And they just gave me a set of rules. They said, essentially, if you follow these rules, you can do whatever you want. I always liked to be in control of my own destiny. I was a pretty introverted kid. One of the things that my father always told me really a couple important things. He said, I may not be the best in the world, but if I give 100%, I'll be in the top 5%.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the More We Know podcast. My name is Mir, your host. The More We Know podcast is one of the world's top mentorship platforms where we bring on people like the mayor of Miami, the founder of Reebok, and just now the former CEO of Chipotle to bring you real-life mentorship in your pocket from wherever you are. If you're on your way to work, if you're in a different part of the world, we bring you the best mentors in your pocket, subject matter experts in their field to provide you that real-life mentorship. Today, I am super privileged and honored with the guest that we have on today. It is now a mentor, Robert Blackwell Jr., who is not only a Chicago-based American businessman and extremely successful entrepreneur who runs multiple companies like Killerspin, but also a personal friend of Barack Obama. Former President Barack Obama had worked for one of his companies, actually. And there's so much about Robert. If you look him up, you can see a lot. But even before I provide a background about Robert, I would love for Robert to dive into who Robert is and growing up for us. Robert, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, Robert, it's I only gave a quick 5-second intro, but it's not fair because if anyone studies your background, you have a plethora of experience. Who is Robert Blackwell Jr.?
Nobody really important, but I'll give you my background. I was born in Philadelphia, but I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. And I would say I was lucky enough to be born with two great parents that had no money. My mother was 20 and my father was 23 when I was born. And they just gave me a set of rules. They said, essentially, if you follow these rules, you can do whatever you want. So I always liked to be in control of my own destiny. I was a pretty introverted kid. So when I would walk to school. I actually started going to school when I was 4. And I would walk around and pick up recycling bottles and take them into the store and kind of get the nickel or whatever it was at the time. So when I was 8, I had noticed that at school, so I was born in 1960. So if you would if you would go out to lunch, so kids would go out to lunch, and if they would get back late for lunch, the teachers would hit you with these thick paddles. So what I thought is that I could go after school and I could buy gum and then I could sell it in school so that people would avoid this punishment. So I was 8 years old and I was kind of making good money selling gum in school. And so I really just always liked to be in control of my own destiny. So in 1973, my family moved to Chicago. My father got a job with IBM. And it was the first time I ever lived outside a black neighborhood. So there was a lot of desegregation going on at that time. So we were the first black family to live in a suburb called Lombard, a western suburb of Chicago. So I had a bomb thrown in my house and "Nigger Go Home" written on our lawn. And luckily my sisters and my mother and my younger siblings weren't there. But my father said, "Suck it up. We're not going anywhere." So it was kind of a strange environment for me, but I went to school and I had this suspicion that white people like gum too. So I started selling gum in school, and I started selling so much gum that people weren't buying the school's ice cream. So the principal ended up having to do a deal with me to sell my gum and his ice cream.
Wow.
So again, I always just liked the kind of problem solving and really being in control of my own destiny. When I was also, I think I was 12 years old, I was always a terrible student. My sister, my immediate younger sister, was always good at school, and I was lousy at school because my head was all over the place. So my parents went to get me tested. They were convinced that I wasn't totally without intelligence. So I went to get tested, and they gave me this math test, and I came up with a better answer than they had on the test. And I remember when I was 12, I was always dreaming about numbers and patterns, and I started to think, what would happen if I kept dividing this element, just kept dividing and it kept dividing, and it's like, okay, I could do this forever, and the patterns look exactly the same. So a few years later, there was a mathematician named Benoit Mandelbrot who came up with the theory of fractal geometry, which is essentially it's the mathematics of self-similar systems. So I realized that I had come up with my own theory around this when I was around 12 years old, but it was really similar to that. So I've always really been into math. I went to school, studied math. I really hated school, so but I studied math because it was easy for me. It was much easier than writing and stuff like that. So, and I worked at IBM. My father worked at IBM, and IBM had this very strict no nepotism rule. So I said, no, you can't hire your relatives. So, but everybody in my family worked at IBM because the deal was my father said, you hire my kids, and I'll hire your kids. That's the way the world works. So there's this saying is that your net work is your net worth, which is true. So I worked at IBM, and I really that wasn't for me because I was a super introverted kid. I never really talked very much. In fact, this manager of mine called my father and said, I don't think your kid's without intelligence, but we just can't get him to talk. In that time, IBM it's a sales culture. Mm-hmm. It's a great company, but it was really focused on sales. In fact, they told you in a nice way, if you're not a salesman, you're a nobody. Mm. And I wasn't. So what they did is I was a systems engineer. They put me in charge of the personal computer here in Chicago, and they connected me with the number one copier salesperson in the country. So my job was to make sure we didn't lose any installs. This guy I was essentially reporting to, because he was the number one copier person in the company. So I ended up writing some algorithms that would give salespeople signals to upgrade machines. So they ended up rolling that out across the country, and then I left. I just wanted to do something not to embarrass my father. So I did that, and I left, and I think I just turned 22. So I left, and I started a company with a couple of friends of mine. And like a lot of 22-year-olds, I knew a lot more about a lot more about technology than business. So I kind of did well enough to kind of take care of myself. But also kind of coincidentally, I remember I was 21 and I was in my best friend's house and I was talking to her mother, and I said, by the time I'm 22, I'm going to buy a Porsche. She said, no, you're not. So of course I said, yes, now I'm going to for sure. So I did. And so anyway, I was 22, I bought this Porsche, and I thought my life was going to be great. I said, I'm going to drive up to the Academy Awards, and all the girls are going to like me. Just my life is going to be great. But it turned out to be the most miserable time of my life. So I learned, it was good, I learned early, the stuff can't make you happy. It's accomplishment that makes you happy. So that's one of the lessons I learned early. So then I was in the car business, and I noticed that you could, at this time, this was the mid-'80s, around 84, I started buying Porsches from Germany, Porsches and Mercedes from Germany, and then you could do the work for the Department of Transportation, essentially reinforce the side panels and put on catalytic conversions for the EPA, and then you could sell those cars for about $10,000 less than they would buy them at dealers. So I did that business for a while. And then a company in California called me and said, hey, will you come work with us? And they were the largest in the country at that time. So I went out there and I did that. But I learned that that was really just a currency arbitrage business. So
what does currency arbitrage mean?
An arbitrage is looking at the spread between one instrument and another. So at the time there was the Deutschmark. This was before the euro. So the German currency was the German Deutschmark. And then obviously there's the US dollar. The fluctuation in those prices would determine the price of a car, because you would have to buy it in Deutschmarks. So if the value of the dollar relative to the Deutschmark went down, it would cost you more. So what you're trying to do in an arbitrage is collect money on spread. So anyway, as the value of the Deutschmark rose against the dollar, that business kind of went away. So I was out in California, and that business kind of fell apart because of the exchange rate spreads. Then I started writing programs for a commodity trading fund. And this guy had a really good strategy. He took all the good trades and put it in his account, spread out all the bad trades to his customers. So I said, they're going to throw the programmer in jail. So I called my parents and said, hey, I think I want to come back to Chicago. Can I stay with you for a little while?
And how old are you at this time?
I was 24. So this would have been 1985. And I called a friend of mine, a guy I knew who was a brother-in-law of one of my best friends, a guy named Keith Velsage, who was an order filler at the Mercantile Exchange. So I called him and I say, hey, man, I'll work for you for free for 6 months if you just let me on the floor. So he did, and then I really learned. I had already started to write trading models, and I had given them to people, and they were making a lot of money off it. So I said, hey, I'm going to come and really learn this. So I went on. I was an arbitrage clerk for Keith at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And to me, that was a really great experience for me. One is it fit my personality, because there's just no feelings there. It's just you have to be super focused and super disciplined, because if you make little mistakes, they can turn into massive losses. So I got pretty good at that. And also it was like, I would say the best time of my life professionally, because I was staying in my parents' house. They were in Lombard, they were in Wheaton, actually. So I stayed in a room. I would wake up at 4. I even put a weight room inside my room so I would never have to leave my room. So I did that. I was working all the time, and I would I'd have to force myself to go to sleep around 11 o'clock so that I could get to the Mercantile Exchange by 6. And then I worked on the floor, and then I went to the library until it closed. And I had kind of mapped by hand all the trading in the Dow from like the 1850s or whenever it started until like when I stopped doing that. So I got pretty good at recognizing patterns. So I did that, and I got pretty good at that. And then I had funded a company that I ended up having to take over. Because one of the things that my father always told me, really a couple important things. He said, I may not be the best in the world, but if I give 100%, I'll be in the top 5%. And he said, the only thing in life you have is your name. You can always make more money back, but you can never get your name back. So because I had recommended this person to people, I stopped trading, which I really loved, and I ended up having to take over that company. So I turned that into a company that wrote financial modeling systems. So we wrote most of the financial modeling systems for Sears and Abbott Labs and Mellon Bank and Farmers and a lot of other kind of large companies. One thing I forgot to mention. So when I was trading, and when I was 24, I wrote this book on trading theory. And I gave it to my father, and I asked my father to read it. He said, well, listen, I got to tell you two things. He said, number one, you don't know how to write. And he said, two, do you know the difference between being eccentric and weird? He said, when you get to be rich, you'll be eccentric. Right now, you're weird. So anyway, my father was like just the world's greatest salesperson. It's like everybody loves my father.
Is that what he did at IBM?
Yeah, he was a salesperson. Then he was a sales manager, and then he managed, he led outsourcing for IBM. So my father's just the kind of guy that everybody loves. So I learned a lot of things from my father. Even though we grew up in an all-black neighborhood, my father, and I would say we were all kind of very pro-black without any anti-anybody else. So he would say, listen, you don't have to hate anybody else to love your own people. So he made sure we went and met other people just so we would get that experience, so that we wouldn't, despite things that blacks had to go through in that day, neither one of my parents wanted us to personalize that to individuals, so we wouldn't have an issue having friendships with people that weren't black. And I think that kind of served us really well. So since my father's a really great salesperson, I said, hey, I know technology stuff. Why don't you leave IBM and you can just come work for me? So at this time, IBM, this would have been in 92. In 92, IBM was having some trouble, and then they did this essentially buyout. They kind of offered everybody a big buyout. And of course, all the good people took the buyouts. So my father retired from IBM, and we started a company together called Blackwell Consulting. I was always against the name because I never liked the attention on me. But so we worked together really from 92 to 95, and it was, I would say, a little bit, I learned a lot from my father, but it was a struggle for me because my brain is really a math brain. I kind of describe myself as an unemployable math misfit. So I see everything in numbers and patterns. And my father was he has a lot more emotional intelligence than I have. I almost have no emotional intelligence, but I can add a little bit. So when we would disagree on things, it would stress me because that's my father. I have to respect my father. So it was really stressful for me. So I said, hey, man, why don't you just buy my half of the company and I'll go do something different. So he did. And then in 95, I decided I was going to buy a house in a black neighborhood. So it's an area of Chicago called North Kenwood, Oakland. It's just north of Hyde Park. Yep. So if you went to University of Chicago, that's the place they told you don't go. Don't go north of 47th Street and don't go west of Cottage Grove. Because it was full of public housing. So the government started tearing down public housing. And what everybody thought we needed was racial integration, and what I thought we needed was economic integration. Because I think, especially if you're a man, you have to take care of yourself first. You have to be prepared yourself before you go ask somebody to help you. So having grown up in black neighborhoods at that time, which were much more healthy, I said what we need is economic integration. So I bought a bunch of land, I built houses, I named them after famous blacks, and that neighborhood is what I envisioned it would be, which is an economically integrated black neighborhood, and things are better for everybody. And what I suspect is that the reason why it worked is because economics, like gravity, tends to work the same way for everybody. So I left construction, and in fact, that neighborhood is today what I envisioned. It's an economically integrated black neighborhood, Things are better for everybody there. And it's the only black neighborhood that I know of that's better off today than it was in the year 1967. And that's because I think the free market works. This is how people go from poverty to prosperity. So I'm also kind of describe myself as a radical black libertarian. So anyway, I did that. I hated construction. So I bought a bunch of land and then kind of sold it off to some young black developers. And then I started EKI-Digital in 1998. So the principle of that is we were going to be the place where the most talented people in our profession would want to work, and we'd be a trusted partner to our customers. So I ended up hiring what we call the talented misfits. And so our company it's about 75% black and Hispanic, which is an anomaly in our industry. So my co-founder, a guy named Diego Ferrer, was my best friend. He's from Venezuela. So we were able to be a place, again, where I would see the technology people, especially when they're talented, a little bit idiosyncratic. So I wanted a culture where those people could be successful, because I remembered being at IBM and not fitting in at all. So I wanted to create this culture so that people could be successful. Didn't matter if they had an accent or they're a man or a woman or whatever it is, you just got judged by what you produced. So that's a company we still run today. And then in the year 2000, Chicago had something called a ping pong festival. So another piece of advice my father gave me, he said, don't be a minority business. It's the crumbs. So
what does that mean?
Okay, so all these diversity, I have a name for it. It's called diversity, equity, and delusion. I think it is a cruel mirage of opportunity. So you should never start a business based on who you are. You start a business because nobody cares about you. Yeah. They care about themselves. Yeah. Now, in my view, people talk about what makes them look good. They do what's important to them. So he said, don't be a minority business, because that's not real. It's really good advice. So we had never done any business in the public sector because I didn't want to be a minority business and be a subcontractor to somebody, which is what everybody kind of pushed people to do. So in 2000, Chicago had something called the Ping Pong Festival, and we had never done any business in the public sector. So I had no relationships, and I wasn't really a relationship guy anyway. So we sponsored the Ping Pong Festival. I took about $100,000 and sponsored it. And then they asked me, a lady named Lois Weisberg asked me to be the chairman. So whenever there were tables out, there were just lines of people to play. So I started to get what I call this entrepreneurial itch. And a year later, I was talking to one of the interns that worked for the company. I said, I think I'm going to start a table tennis company. Because I looked out, and there was really two reasons. One is, why everybody knows table tennis or ping pong, as it's commonly known, nobody can name the name of a brand. So I said, I think there's opportunity for us. And the other thing is, I said, black people don't own anything in sports. We participate in sports, but we don't own anything. So those were kind of my motivations. And I said, we're going to be the number one company in the world in our space. So we started off, I started to kind of look back and look at other kind of call these niche sports and how they came about. So I looked at skateboarding. I only looked at two things, skateboarding and martial arts. So in skateboarding, which what I would call it was a sport of the two kids. Kids who were too fat, too short, too skinny, too scared to play, the big football, basketball. There was no soccer at the time, but football, baseball, basketball, those kind of things. You had, so around the age of 12, the stud athletes start to separate themselves from the rest of the world. So now you've got all these people that are kind of left behind. So when I was young, I studied martial arts. So I was in wrestling first, then judo, then hapkido, and I really liked that. So when I was in junior high and I started doing this, Bruce Lee was the hero of the world. Everybody wanted to be Bruce Lee. It was just, Bruce Lee was like the Michael Jordan of that time. It was weird. I would wear Bruce Lee t-shirts and girls would like grab my t-shirt. It was insane. So out of the martial arts whole genre came about because of Bruce Lee. Because Bruce Lee was cool, he was strong, but he had good character. So he started the whole martial arts genre. Now, at the time, nobody knew anything about China. Remember, this was a guy who was Chinese, who had gotten locked out of opportunities because he was Chinese. So he had to leave the United States, where he was actually born, go back to become a star in Asia, and then he became a star in the United States and really then around the world. So what did Bruce Lee do to make martial art a genre? It solved an emotional problem primarily for young men. So since every young man needs what I call the stud factor, needs something that gives him the stud factor, I said, I think we can solve an emotional problem for males that are teenagerish. So what I said is we are going to make, so when I thought about the brand of, so I came up with the name Killerspin because I wanted, killer is like a synonymous with cool, nothing violent, and spin obviously ties to table tennis. So I wanted a brand that was what I call sexy, edgy, but non-offensive. So I think in your brand is the reputation, it's the feeling that you put in the head of a customer. So I think brand is one of the most important things that you can have as a business. So what we wanted to do was to make table tennis beautiful. So the other thing is like in skateboarding really took off because of ESPN and MTV. They all kind of came up at the same time. So I said, we're going to be the leader in content in the world, in table tennis content. So I said, I want to be the partner for ESPN and MTV. We never really got there with MTV, but I'd looked at what they had done. So in 2001, I took a trip to China. Somebody had introduced me to the head of their Olympic committee, and I had produced a video. So first time I went to China was in 2001. I went there because I wanted to see, that's their national sport, how people interacted with it, how it was presented. So I went there, and I said, this is just not beautiful. And in the United States, it was horrible. So around the world, I would travel around the world, see how table tennis was presented, and it was just terrible. So I said, we are also going to be an American brand. So take what's the, innovation and entertainment value that people would think about with American sports. And I was going to put that in there. So in 2001, I went to China, his name was Li Furong. I produced a video and said, I think table tennis can be something that it's not right now. It's a beautiful sport, but it deserves to be presented better. And I said, I want to have an event in Chicago to celebrate the 30-year anniversary of ping pong diplomacy. And would you bring your national team? So this is like asking Jerry Reinsdorf to bring the Bulls to my event when Michael Jordan was there. Mm-hmm. This was their national sport. These are the biggest heroes.
And you're not a sales guy, right? Like you're not someone who you don't really do that.
No, but I did learn something from my cousin, who's a really good salesperson, who said the role of a salesperson is to put a dream in the head of the customer and help them and convince them that they're the person to help them get there. So in business, I think you want to either solve an emotional or financial problem for somebody. The bigger the problem, the more they're willing to pay for it. So we got the Chinese national team to come, and actually in the summer of 2000, they had the U.S. Open of table tennis in Fort Lauderdale. So I had done some research. I said who all the big stars were. So I'm expecting to go down there, and this to be like a basketball game or tennis or something where you couldn't get near these athletes. But I go there, and I'm like walking up to them. He's like the best players in the world, and I'm just walking up and talking to him.
Like going up to MJ.
Yeah, it's like, hey, man, this. So while I'm there, I'm having this vision of what this could be. And then I met a guy, his name's Zoran Primorac. I said, I'm going to have an event, and I want you to come. I'd like you to come to my event. Now, nothing like this had ever been done. So I met a bunch of pro players and say, I'm going to have this event, and I want you to come there. I'm going to call you. Nobody took me serious. So it wasn't really almost 2 years later, we had this event called it was a 30-year anniversary of the ping pong diplomacy. So there's that side. And we had something called the Extreme Table Tennis Championship. So I said, I want to take like the WWE and combine it with a table tennis tournament. So we really changed presentation. So I think I spent $500,000 on that event.
When you do that, because I know you also have the trader by nature, because for people listening in, that could be a lot of money to some people. Did you think there was risk? When you put that type of money up, was it calculated?
Yeah, it was all. I knew what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was I wanted to own table tennis for ESPN. I wanted to be ESPN's partner on table tennis because that was one of the goals that I had. The other reason why I did it is I said I can entertain people because there was lots of different tech companies at the time. So it's hard to distinguish yourself from people. So I would say why everybody loves table tennis. I'm going to show off Chicago to the world, and I'll be able to meet people, and it kind of worked out. So it was kind of the hospitality sport for EKI-Digital, just like think about a skybox. Why do people spend all this money at Skybox? What Skybox is? Because they can lock their customers into a cell, essentially, and then they can do deals with them. So that was kind of my goal, and it worked out really well. So for a long time, we produced all the table tennis media for ESPN around the world. And the other thing is that people who were into table tennis wanted table tennis to get the respect that other sports had. So we had what I call this kind of halo effect around the world, and everybody got to know who we were because the world was kind of dying. What people believed was if table tennis could be popular in the United States, it would then get the respect it deserves. So that helped us solve an emotional problem for people. And that worked out. And then we essentially said, we're going to act. So in business, a lot of times you want to do is to look across industries, look into a different industry. Because if you just do something within your industry, your competitors can copy it easily. put a new feature or something like that. So we just started to look at like the automobile industry. So how do companies like Porsche, and I was a big Porsche nut at the time, how do they create this emotional connection with people? It is their brand. So, and their brand is a lot of times represented in their the emblem. Mm-hmm. So I said, we're going to have an emblem, and and those emblems tell the story of the brand. So we ended up creating an emblem, and in the emblem, there's 4 red stars, which are the stars of Chicago. So I said that we're from Chicago. And we also have in the emblem, the Roman numerals. One of them is 2001, that's XX1, and then 41, which is LVI. Excuse me. So those things have meaning. So also your brand has to have some kind of meaning. So we decided we're going to make table tennis beautiful. We're going to be very different from everybody else in the world, and that's kind of where we are. So that's a little bit about Killerspin. And then last year, a few years ago, I met with somebody who had bought a table from us, and they got to just meet the coolest people from people that buy our stuff. And there were 2 traders, again, Vinay and Sanjay Tolia. They were traders at the board of trade. They were option traders, excuse me. And I was an options trader. So we became really good friends. And I always said, man, I'm so jealous of you guys. I wish I had just stayed in trading.
And this was despite, because you traded in 08, you saw all the crises, right?
I was trading in 87 when the crash happened.
Oh, even a worse crash.
Oh, yeah. So the housing bubble happened in 08. So I saw that coming. So I said, man, I really wish I had just stayed in trading because it really fit my personality. You don't have to be around a lot of people, and it's just you get it right or you don't. Yeah. So he said, no, man, it's much harder now. And so I started to think, what if I were to approach digital as an asset class? What if I were to look at it the same way I looked at the world in trading? So I ended up writing this paper called Algorithms and the Death of IT, which essentially said the same thing that happened in the trading world is going to happen in digital in other asset classes. So right now, there's no more trading floors because all the opportunity, the identification is all algorithmic. So people write the algorithms that present the opportunities, and execution is digital, supported by super fast infrastructure. So you see things now like Chat GPT, which is really hot, and people talk about AI. AI is really, in my view, it's just algorithmic opportunity identification. And then you get machine learning. You're just recognizing patterns and presenting options. So this stuff really came out of, a lot of it is the trading world. And it works because of this branch of math that I've always been into called fractal geometry, which is really just the study of self-similar systems. So after I wrote this paper, I said that if I decompose all the different components of cost, and I actually wrote most of the systems, financial modeling systems for Sears. So what a retailer does is, if you want to sell, like you want to sell this to Walmart, they don't ask you what the cost is. They say, give me a materials list, give me a labor list, give me a shipping list. And you say, okay, this costs me, say, $1. They said, I'll pay you $1.12. That's how it works. So in procurement, in purchasing, the lowest level of maturity is, I call purchasing. It's like follow the rules before you buy something, which is what most people have. Procurement is understanding all the different components of cost, but then investment management is something different. Investment management is about ROI, which is return minus investment. Most people they don't look at spend as investment. They look at it as an expenditure that you want to rationalize. So I ended up writing what I call my universal theory of getting stuff done, which is that results equals the quality of strategy plus execution divided by time. So you always start with what you want to get accomplished. Create a strategy that makes you unique and loved, because that is what creates margin in your business. Differentiation and customer love. Well, Apple is not very differentiated. Nike is not very differentiated, but they have a high degree of customer love or brand affinity. It's kind of the same thing. So either you're going to have a lot of brand affinity, which are people are making an emotional decision. It tells them who they are by associating with your brand. That's why when Nike says just do it, it is not talking about the features and functions of their shoes or their clothes. They don't do that. That is really what made Nike, right, in Michael Jordan and Bo Jackson and stuff like that. But it has a very strong brand. So if it's about the athlete, there are strategies around, hey, connecting to the world's great athletes. Apple, on the other hand, it's about about the creative and the people that are different and who wants to be just like everybody else. Yeah. Nobody really wants to be, but they act like it. Sure. So, when you're unique, you have a high degree of differentiation. You have a lot of margin there. So that's why strategy is the most important thing that you have to do in the beginning. First of all, you have to decide what you want to be. Then you create a strategy to get you there. But then you have to create an execution engine, which are people, processes, tools, and facilities. And then you divide it by time. This is why time is money. So this is the thing that's missing. So what we're trying to do is to look at, if there was a mathematician named Jim Simons, who's still alive. He started a company called Renaissance Technologies. If you had given Jim Simons in 1990 $10,000, by 2016, you'd had $110 million. Wow. If you'd left your money in the stock market, you'd have $110,000. Wow. The difference between the $110,000 and the $110 million is called alpha. Alpha is return in excess of a benchmark, or beta. In investing, it's called beta, or it's really just a benchmark. So what we did is essentially apply trading math to other asset classes. So in trading people right now, you need to be a trader. You got to have massive computing power because you're just trading on minute movements, like in fractions of a second. So you have to be able to see what the patterns are. And you can only do those kind of things with computers now. So the spread used to be mega spread, which when I was on the floor, the people on the floor would just take advantage of that. They would just take advantage of people who were trying to do day trading because they weren't very sophisticated. So I say we could use the same principles that are in trading and apply those to other asset classes, and we would be very different, and we could discover efficiencies. So that's why we started Quant 16. So Quant 16 is, I would say, come at it really two things I care about a lot. I care about the free enterprise system because that is how people go from poverty to prosperity and can live in dignity. But I'm also kind of a math nerd. So I said, so Quant 16 is a for-profit company with a social mission. So the idea is what we can do is use really advanced analytics to help companies find efficiency in their vendor spend and we can help them find the Black and Hispanic companies they can do business with. And it doesn't cost them anything. We just take a 2.5-point portfolio management fee from the vendors. And because there's margin there, we can fund things associated with Alpha Mission. So Alpha Mission, I describe as a movement of people of goodwill dedicated to proving that the free enterprise system works for everybody. Because actually in 2009, after Barack was elected, I got invited to do a tour of India. And I met somebody at the central bank, and he said, well, in 1991, we figured out socialism doesn't work. We started to free our economy. Our government started doing business with small entrepreneurs, which prepared them for the international market. And then U.S. business just did business with capable Asian entrepreneurs. And in a period of 20 years, India and China took 750 million people out of poverty. During the same period, blacks went more into poverty. So if we look back in history, I think our country's had three great movements. The first was the founding of the Republic, really the first government that said it exists for the benefit of the people, not vice versa. However, not all people got to participate in that, obviously. The next great American movement was the abolitionist movement, right? The removal of slavery, that stain from the country. Most people don't know there was actually a black business person in Philadelphia in the late 1700s, which was a primary funder of the abolitionist movement. So this third great American movement, and they kind of happened once a century, was the civil rights movement, which I called kind of the one set of rules movement. So obviously before that, these Jim Crow rules said, if you're black, you got to do this. If you're white, you can do that, which I think damaged our country. In 1895, Booker T. Washington gave a speech at the Atlanta Exposition where he said, America's never going to be what it can be until blacks get included in the economy. He said, we don't need to live around you, but we do have to be a part of the economy. Otherwise, we will be disproportionately involved in crime and other negative activities. So there was a man named Julius Rosenwald who was from Chicago. He was the CEO of Sears. And he said, what's happening to blacks in this country is wrong and we should do something about it. But he responded to Booker T. Washington, called to create a better country. So they built 5,300 schools in the South, which is how black people got educated. But more importantly, they created something called the Negro Business League. Because Booker T. Washington said the purpose of education is to teach you how to be a good citizen and to prepare you for the economy. And that blacks should focus on entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial participation. Out of that came the Black Wall Streets, which there were 81 of these freedom colonies, or otherwise known as Black Wall Streets, all across the Jim Crow South, and they became relatively prosperous. In fact, the height of black business was between 1910 and 1930. We've never really recovered since then. So I would say if the free enterprise system is the way to take people from poverty to prosperity. And by the way, that is how you solve the crime problem. Because there is nowhere in the world where poor people are healthy, educated, and safe. And conversely, there is no place in the world where affluent people, regardless of their race, are not healthy, educated, and safe. So the issue then is attacking poverty. And so how do people go from poverty to prosperity? It is entrepreneurial-led economic activity that leads to the appreciation of education and social capital. Social capital is when you reach back and you pull people from your community along. But more importantly, you create this aspirational roadmap for your young people so they know where to place their bets. So I've been trying to say these things to the business community for the last 15 or so years. It said, if we don't do something about the situation of blacks in our city, it is going to affect, it's already affecting the brand of Chicago. It's going to be catastrophic. And I think now the issue we have is that young people are confusing socialism with social good. They're not the same. So actually my grandfather, my mother's side, was a Cuban immigrant. And family. I used to go to Venezuela a lot. You can't go there now. It's unlivable. So what I think is, if we don't prove that the free enterprise system works for everybody, we won't be the first country in history to lose the freedoms that we have. And I think generally people want to help other people, but too often they think, let's give somebody some charity. Charity are the crumbs of other people's success. It is noble to help anybody, but it is better to teach a man to fish than to give him fish. By the way, Urban Fishing Development was the name of the development company that I had. So anyway, that's my life in a little while.
That was Robert. That's first off, fascinating journey. I think it's not only inspirational, but I think it also helps us Gen Zs look at the fact that nothing is directionally linear, right? Like we often focus so much on this linear path, getting to this position, X, Y, Z, but you've had moves where you've gone many different directions, which I think is just reassuring to us Gen Zs. Now, number one, thank you for sharing your journey, but a couple questions I want to ask in sort of the conclusion side of the podcast. One, you're famous for being good friends with former President Barack Obama, and at some point, Barack had worked for you. I'm really curious about, how that came about and the relationship you guys have.
Sure. Well, one day when me and my father, this was in 1992, my father read an article. He said, there's this kid that just moved to Chicago. Barack's a little young, it's 9 months younger than me, so that would make him a kid to my father. He said he was the first black editor of the Harvard Law Review. We should meet him. So somehow we found a law firm he worked for, and he came to our office, so I got to meet him. And so we're essentially the same age. I would say kind of two skinny black kids. So we just became friends for that. After that. So he had done some legal work. He was actually the founding lawyer for Killerspin. And when I was in the White House last time he was there, he reminded me of that. So he's obviously super intelligent guy. So obviously I know him and his family. And I think through one of the first fundraisers for him, at that time I had to pay people to come listen to him. But I remember in 2003, I told a friend of mine, I said, Barack is going to be president. Now remember, I think nobody in my age group or older, nobody at that time ever thought we were going to have a black president. And that was just not in anybody's consciousness. That's like, if you were black, that's the one unachievable goal of being an American, is to be president of the United States. But I told somebody, Barack is going to be president. And I said that in 2003. So I just kind of seen the whole journey of Barack. And the big thing when he ran for Senate, to me, when he was running for Senate, that was a bigger deal than running for president. So he was running for Senate, and a lot of his friends were black entrepreneurs, which are in his age group, who were supportive of him. But I always say I'm the second luckiest guy in the world after him. He's the luckiest guy for sure. But when going through this journey for him to become senator, and he gave that speech at the Democratic National Convention in 2004, I was there. I was like maybe 10 feet away from him on the stage when he did. And that was like, that whole thing was kind of like a religious experience. So I would say I love Barack and I love his family, and we're friends, and I got to go on that journey, which I think nobody ever thought that was going to happen in our country at the time. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's definitely historic, and it's motivational for the next generation. And I think it just adds, you had asked me a question when we met a few weeks back about if you sit down and you ask someone to name some extremely successful, African-American business people, and you said not athletes, you don't want to hear about entertainment. it's sort of almost like tragic that it's hard for people to name that. So I think maybe Barack is one of those examples of people that have said
No. It's not successful. It's entrepreneurs. There's
yeah.
plenty of black politicians. There's no lack of that.
Yeah.
No, but the question is, name two famous black entrepreneurs that would be nationally known with no connection to sports or entertainment. That's a question that nobody can answer.
Yeah.
There's been lots of black politicians forever.
Yeah. 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 And it was such a good question to hear. Now, the other thing I want to ask related to that is now in 2023, you still continue to see the wealth gap. Why do the rich continue to get richer, and then the despair between poverty, they continue to get even more poor?
Well, I think there is a little bit of a fallacy on wealth. If you take, it's also like big companies. Like people act like big companies control everything. That's just not true. So if you just go back and look at history, when I was in college, Microsoft didn't exist. Amazon didn't exist. Google didn't exist. Apple, let me see, when I was in, maybe Apple existed, but it was a nothing burger. The big companies were, there was IBM and Hewlett Packard and GE and GM and things like that. Also, all the wealthy people were like oil people. There was no tech people. So it is not true that wealth is stagnant. But the question is, how do you go from being poor to being wealthy? Was Bill Gates born a billionaire? No. Was Elon Musk born a billionaire? No. Was Jeff Bezos born a billionaire? No. Was Zuckerberg? No. Was Jack Dorsey? No. Nobody knew who they were. Their parents weren't billionaires. Now, they happened to be in ecosystems.
Fortunate situation.
They could be in ecosystems. They got some luck where they could apply their talent. So it is not in a rising stock market where you have most of your assets or financial assets like stock. So if the stock market goes up and most of your assets are in stock, or your business is a financial something where you're in finance, buying and selling bonds and T-bills and all this kind of stuff on behalf of the government, you're going to make a lot of money. But how many people even know? I wonder how many young people even really know what IBM does anymore. I don't think I've heard a person under 50 even talk about IBM. When I was young, IBM was the thing. IBM's, listen, relatively speaking, it's not in the top 10. None of the companies when I was young that were in the top 10 are there today. They're not. Tesla is more valuable than all the big three, what they used to call the big three. Now there's only two. Chrysler doesn't exist anymore. So wealth depends on participation in the modern parts of the economy. So I think it is not true that the poor keep getting poorer. What is true is that poor people, poor communities aren't participating in the economy in proportion to their talent. So we have this nostalgia for the 1950s where in every little town you had a factory. So if your economy was based on a factory, you've really suffered really since the early 2000s. Why? Because all the low-wage jobs have gone overseas somewhere. Now you have automation, so there are just not that many of those jobs anymore. But the question is our country more affluent or less affluent per capita than it was back then? It's more affluent. So those people that participate in the modern parts of the economy, the technical professional services, tech, legal, finance, they're doing well. They make more money than their parents. Now, if you're not in that, then you're going to have trouble. But imagine you could go back and have a conversation in the 1950s or in the 1930s. They will be talking about all the poor farmers and how the Industrial Revolution destroyed farming in America. Now, agriculture was the major industry in the United States at one point. Mm-hmm. Does anybody want to go back to that? No. What we need to do is to innovate our way out of that. And that's really one of the great things about this country when it's not hamstrung by government. And your job as an entrepreneur is to innovate. And most people don't understand what innovation is. Innovation is a scientific process of ideation, calculation, and experimentation. You're never going to get everything right the first time. But essentially, you're taking a guess or you have a hypothesis. Sure. You test that hypothesis. You want to get out there, but you got to use good principles. And if you don't do that in trying to be in business, you're going to fail. It's like trying to be a basketball player and not knowing how to dribble, pass, and shoot. You've got to understand to be successful in business. If you don't understand what a balance sheet is, an income statement, and a cash flow statement, you have no chance to be successful. So this issue of poverty, listen, poverty in the United States is nowhere near what poverty is in other parts of the world. Sure. I mean, poor people in India and Africa don't have 2 cell phones in a car. So what we have to do is to go back and look at what are the principles that have taken people from poverty to prosperity. And it is also a fallacy that you can just solve, you fix everything at one time. The way the world really works is it is the entrepreneur that pulls other people forward. So you can have good entrepreneurship. So what we really have is a demand problem. If you fix the demand problem, the supply reacts to demand. So if you got people to do business in both urban and rural America, and that's where a lot of the poverty is concentrated. It's in both urban and rural America. Mm-hmm. But we have so little innovation now where people think about how can we creatively solve these problems instead of just running back to the 1950s and saying the world should be like that. Well, the world's never going to be like that. But if you look through innovation, there's all kinds of opportunities in the market that would take people out of poverty. That's why I think it's the entrepreneur that is going to create the environment that pulls people forward. That is the only way in history people have gone from poverty to prosperity. Not through government edict, definitely not through big companies. So anyway, it's my little thought on that.
I mean, you have to innovate or die, right? So
yep.
I love that. In closing, I ask all my guests this, 60 seconds to 90 seconds. If you're giving a commencement speech and it's the, college kids graduating today and what you see in today's macro environment, it's 2023. What is Robert Blackwell Jr.'s 60-second commencement speech to people graduating today?
Be world class. Be world class. Care more about other people than you care about yourself. And you'll be successful. Whatever it is, just be world class at something. So if you're world class, Michael Jordan didn't start off as world class. He had the potential to be world class. Now, he was not going to be a world class jockey. There was no way that's going to happen. But figure out where in the world you can be world class and give 100%. Dedicate yourself to being world class and having good character and putting other people, not letting people use you. But if you want to be successful in life, the Bible says, frankly, it's better to give than receive. And I believe that is true. That means you want to think about others before you think about yourself. And if you're going to be in business, whether you're an employee or whether you're an entrepreneur, your job is to solve a problem for somebody that they're willing to pay for. So it doesn't matter what you want. It matters what they want. Solve their problem. So again, be world class. Don't focus on yourself, because the more you focus on yourself, you'll be miserable. And go learn mistakes from other people. Go read books, read old books, new books, read deeply around philosophy and physics and marketing and all kinds of things. And but focus on your character, because that's the thing that you can't get back in life. And think more about accomplishment than entertaining yourself. So that's my
I love that. And it comes back full circle to what you said earlier about when you even launch a business, don't launch a business for something you want. Like, it's something that the market needs it, right? Because business doesn't care about your feelings or your emotion. You know, I know that's the last question, but just because I learned so much, one last question real quick. I'm so fascinated by it. You're in the financial industry, so you've seen the crashes, you've seen 1987, you've seen 2001, 2008. You saw our Gen Z professional crisis, which was COVID, and then this inflationary environment. I'm just really curious. How does Robert Blackwell Jr. You're good at managing money, but how do you manage stress?
I would say stress is an internal reaction to an external event. So I think you can't have faith and fear at the same time. It's better to have faith. If you have faith, you cannot have fear. It's like when you're young.
Wow.
So I'm religious. You can't have faith in God and then be fearful at the same time. Like if you're a child and you're scared, what do? You run to your parents. So you have faith that they are going to protect you. So if you look at life the same way you look at working out, if you go work out, there's this saying in working out, no pain, no gain. If you don't have to fight through things, you can never progress. So it's just part of life. So you have to, if you want to be successful, you have to manage yourself. The time to be scared is when everything is going your way. The time to be calm is when it looks like the building is falling on your head. So you have to manage. In fact, in trading, that's what they tell you. You have to manage fear and greed. You have to manage your emotions. So you just have to manage your emotions. You got to fight your way through the challenges that are going to help. If you don't have challenges, you're never going to grow. You're just going to live in your parents' basement forever. But eventually you got to get out in the real world, and you're going to have to deal with adversity. You cannot grow as a person if you don't know how to deal with adversity.
I love that. That is Robert Blackwell Jr. That was powerful for me to even hear myself. Where can people learn more about your businesses or the missions you got going on for people listening in? And I'll put all the details in.
I don't know. Listen, if you want to be bored, you can just go to my LinkedIn profile or you can send me an email at rblackwell@killerspin.com.
Okay. Well, Robert, thank you for being our mentor today. This has been quite possibly one of my favorite episodes to just sit in and listen to your journey, because it's not only inspiration to me, but all the Gen Zs listening. I hope they can take away this idea of being calm and avoiding fear and being rational. It's so fascinating to see how you take your trading ideologies and put it to every part of your life. So Perfect. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. This is great.
Thank you.